She got hit. Right there at the dinner table. Her own mother's hand came across her face so fast that the sound reached me before the image did, and I was already out of my chair before I even decided to move. I caught her. I caught Simone before she could fall into the edge of the table, and I held her steady while the room went completely silent around us. And in that silence, with her cheek going red under my hand, and 12 people sitting there pretending they had not just witnessed a woman strike her own daughter, I made a decision. I was done being invisible. But here's what they didn't know yet. I owned the building we were standing in. I want you to stay with me. Because what happened after that dinner nearly cost me everything: my reputation, my employees, the business I had spent 15 years building in the dark. And I need you to understand who I was before that night, before any of this, before Simone, before the Vauxhall family turned my life into something they could use against me. Because the man who walked into that private dining room in his plain jacket and his old watch, he had a reason for every single choice he made. And none of those reasons made what happened okay, but they made it survivable. My name is Deacon Cole. I am 38 years old. I grew up in the West End of Atlanta, Georgia, in a house where the water heater made a sound like it was arguing with itself, and the carpet in the hallway had a dip in it from 20 years of the same people walking the same path every morning. My mother worked doubles at a hotel on Peachtree, not the kind of hotel I would eventually own, the kind where the elevator broke twice a month and the ice machine on the 3rd floor never fully recovered. She came home smelling like industrial cleaner and never once complained about it in front of me. I watched that. I stored it somewhere I didn't have a name for yet. I started buying property the way most people buy furniture. Quietly, practically, without telling anyone until I had no choice. My first restaurant was a converted gas station in Mechanicsville. I put in the tile myself on weekends. By the time I was 32, Meridian Hospitality Group was operating 11 full-service properties across Georgia and the Carolinas. By 35, we had cleared our first $250 million. I did not hold a press conference. I did not post about it. I kept the name of the holding company buried deep enough that even the people who worked for me didn't always know the full picture. That was a choice I made early and never regretted. I liked walking my own hotels without anyone knowing I was the owner. No driver, no entourage, no one rushing to hold doors. Just me and a plain jacket and the honest smell of a kitchen that was either running right or wasn't. One of my maintenance supervisors at the Meridian Midtown property, a man named Gerald, 62 years old, with hands like he'd been building things since before I was born, stopped me one evening near the back stairwell. "Mr. Cole," he said, "that new break room setup you approved. People are eating lunch together now instead of going to their cars. Didn't think something like that could matter this much." It mattered, I told him. More than he knew. I walked to my car thinking about how the smallest dignities compounded over time. How the absence of them did, too. Simone called on a Tuesday evening while I was driving back from Savannah. Her name lit up my phone and I smiled before I answered, the way I always did and never quite got used to. "Hey." Her voice came back softer than usual. "Too careful. My parents want to have dinner. Saturday." I kept my hands on the wheel. "That sounds formal." "It is," she said. "They want to meet you before we make any announcements." Before we announce that we're engaged, I heard what she wasn't saying. "This is a test, Simone. I know." She paused. "They just want to understand who you are." I almost said, "Then let them ask." Instead I said, "What did you tell them about me? That you work in hospitality. That you're private. That you're building something of your own." I sat with that for a moment. Building something. I had 43 properties in 6 states, 3 more in development, but I understood why she'd framed it that way. She wasn't hiding me. She was afraid of them. And that was worse. "Let them meet exactly who they think I am," I told her. "Deacon, it's fine." It wasn't fine. The next morning I packed the way I always packed when I didn't want to perform. Plain shoes. Old jeans. The navy jacket I'd had for 6 years. My silver watch, the one with the scratched face and the worn leather band that Simone had once asked about. "Why do you still wear that?" "Because it still works," I told her. She'd given me a look that said she suspected the answer was about more than timekeeping. She was right. The restaurant was on a restored block near Buckhead, Atlanta, the kind of neighborhood where the architecture had been polished enough to suggest that nothing difficult had ever happened there. Gas lanterns flanked the entrance. The hostess stand was marble. The whole place had the particular glow of a room designed to make certain people feel seen and certain others feel assessed. I knew that glow well. I had designed versions of it myself, though I'd always tried to make the warmth feel less conditional. The valet took one look at my rental and then looked past me at the black Range Rovers pulling up behind. I handed him my keys anyway. He blinked. I didn't take it personally. He was doing what he'd been trained to do, reading the room the way someone had taught him to read it. I'd trained hundreds of young employees. Most people don't dismiss you because they're cruel. They dismiss you because someone taught them who counts. Upstairs, the private room was already full. I appeared in the doorway and Simone saw me first. Relief crossed her face, then immediately something more careful. She started to rise and then didn't, because her mother was watching. Montgomery Vauxhall sat at the head of the table, broad-shouldered, silver-templed. The kind of man who had probably never once sat with his back to a room. Beside him, Claudette wore a cream dress and a double strand of pearls, and the expression of someone who had decided what they thought before I walked through the door. Montgomery stood for the handshake. It was the handshake of a man checking a grip, not greeting one. "Good to finally meet you," he said. They'd been told I worked in restaurants. Not owned, worked in. "I spend most of my time making sure guests leave happy," I said. A man beside Montgomery laughed lightly at that. Simone's fingers tightened around her napkin. I noticed which seat they'd given me. Near the service entrance. Not insultingly close, just close enough that waiters passed behind my chair every few minutes. Not something you could complain about. Just something you felt. Dinner started politely. That was always the dangerous part. Families like this one didn't open with cruelty. They opened with weather and wine and polite, surgical questions designed to establish hierarchy before the main course. Simone tried to keep the conversation easy, the new gallery opening downtown, a renovation on Peachtree, a chef she'd heard good things about. Every time she opened a window, her father closed it. And then Montgomery set down his glass and asked the question that changed the temperature of the room. "Deacon, what exactly do you bring to a marriage?" The table quieted. Claudette gave a small, practiced laugh. "Montgomery, please, I'm serious. Love is beautiful. Love doesn't pay property taxes." A few people smiled into their wine. I looked at Simone. Her face had gone careful and still, the way a face goes when someone is fighting not to show how much something hurts. "A man should be able to take care of his family," I said. "That's not something I lose sleep over." Montgomery leaned back. "That sounds like something men say when they don't have much. Clean, deliberate, landed exactly where he intended it to." And then Claudette turned to her daughter with a softness in her voice that had something hard underneath it. Simone could have married a surgeon, a senator's son. She had options. Real options. She's always had a tender heart for people she wants to help. Simone set her fork down. "He doesn't need help." Claudette's smile tightened at the corners. "Don't be dramatic, sweetheart." That word, sweetheart, said like a leash pulled gently, but pulled. A waiter approached. Someone shifted suddenly. An elbow caught the edge of the tray. A glass tipped. I caught it pure reflex. 15 years of kitchen instinct. My hands moving before my mind did. The waiter steadied himself. "Thank you, sir." Across the room, I caught the eye of the general manager, Marcus Webb. We'd hired him 18 months ago from a property in Raleigh. His expression changed the moment he saw me, a small, controlled recognition. I gave him the smallest shake of my head. "Not yet." Montgomery noticed the look between us and misread it entirely. "Well," he said, raising his glass, "at least you're useful around a dining room." A nervous laugh moved through the table. Simone's cheeks went pink. "Dad, please." He kept going. "I just hope my daughter doesn't spend her life supporting someone who never quite figures out how to grow up." That was the moment I understood this was never a dinner. It was an inspection with predetermined results. Simone pushed her chair back. The legs scraped the floor, loud enough that 2 guests flinched. "That's enough," she said. And her voice was shaking, but it was clear. Claudette turned toward her daughter slowly. Her expression shifted in a way that reminded me of a door closing rather than opening. "You will not embarrass this family over a man like him." Those words didn't land like a shout. They landed like a verdict. Everyone at the table heard them. Everyone at the table understood what they meant, that Simone could have opinions in private, could disagree in appropriate tones, could even feel wounded as long as none of it became inconvenient in front of guests. Simone stood fully then. "No." Such a small word. It changed everything. Claudette's eyes narrowed. "Sit down." Simone shook her head. "You don't get to talk about him that way anymore." I was watching her and I felt something crack open in my chest, not because she was defending me, but because I suddenly understood what it cost her. Some people are not raised to be peaceful. They are raised to be afraid of what happens when they stop performing peace. Montgomery looked at me then, the kind of look a man uses when he's decided to make an example. A real man builds security before he walks into a room like this. "What exactly do you own, Deacon? Besides a good attitude and stories from restaurant floors?" Simone's voice cracked but didn't break. He is worth more than anyone at this table. Claudette stood so fast her pearls swung. Enough, Mom. That slap came before anyone moved. It was not loud. It was quick and precise and absolutely terrible because it came from a mother's hand without hesitation. The sound cut through the room and took everything else with it. Simone staggered one step. I was already moving. I caught her by the arm and shoulder. She was trembling, but she stayed upright. Her cheek was already reddening under my palm. The room was completely silent. Not the comfortable silence of people waiting for something. The suffocating silence of people who have just watched something they cannot unsee and are desperately hoping someone else decides what it means. My hand closed around the edge of the table. Not to flip it. To keep myself from becoming the man they expected me to be. I had been insulted in that room, dismissed, seated near the kitchen like an afterthought. But watching Simone stand there punished for telling the truth about someone she loved changed something in me that I don't think ever fully changed back. All the patience I had carried into that room stopped mattering. Something quieter replaced it. Claudette's lips barely moved. You spoiled child. Thaddeus lifted his glass again, as if ceremony could cover cruelty. This is what happens, he said to the room, when emotion outruns judgment. I want to be honest with you. In that moment, I have never in my life been closer to losing the discipline it took me 15 years to build. Everything I had, the restraint, the strategy, the deliberate invisibility I had chosen that evening, all of it was right at the edge. Because you can take insults against yourself. You learn to metabolize them, but watching someone you love get hurt for defending you is a different weight entirely. That weight does not distribute evenly. It sits. I helped Simone steady herself. Her eyes were wet but steady. Then I reached inside my jacket. Every person at that table watched my hand. Maybe they expected an excuse. Maybe they thought I was going to produce some proof of income, some folded document, some gesture of desperation. Instead, I placed my matte black card on the white tablecloth beside the untouched wine glass. No speech, no flourish, just the card. Montgomery glanced at it and gave a dry laugh. What exactly is that supposed to prove? It proves nothing, I said. It identifies me. Marcus Webb had stopped moving on the other side of the room. The moment he saw the card, he walked toward us, not quickly enough to cause alarm, but with the measured pace of a man who understood he had missed something significant. He stopped at my side, lowered his head slightly, spoke in a voice steady enough for the whole table to hear. Good evening, Mr. Cole. I apologize, we weren't informed you'd be joining this party tonight. Please inform the kitchen, he told his staff. Mr. Cole is in the private room. Claudette's hand dropped from her pearls. Montgomery stared at the card again. And then Marcus said the word that broke the room open. Boss. One syllable. The whole table rearranged itself without anyone moving a chair. Montgomery looked at me the way a man looks when the floor has shifted under him and he hasn't decided yet whether to pretend it hasn't. Claudette's hand stayed near her pearls like she'd forgotten what a composed woman was supposed to do with her fingers. The guests who had laughed into their wine glasses suddenly found the tablecloth extraordinarily interesting. That is the thing about power that people get wrong. It does not change who you are. It only changes who other people are willing to admit you are. Marcus stood beside me. Mr. Cole owns the group that operates this property, he said, along with several other hospitality assets in the region. 11 properties in Georgia and the Carolinas. 3 more coming before the end of the year. If any of you need to connect with our executive team at any point, I can arrange that. Someone at the far end of the table set their fork down very slowly. Another guest looked at his phone, realized he was holding it, and put it away. Claudette's voice turned soft, almost sweet. Deacon, honey. We had no idea. I looked at her. Yes, you did. You had an idea. You just decided it was the wrong kind. Nobody answered. Montgomery cleared his throat. Well, this certainly explains a few things. There was no mystery, I said. Only assumptions. Montgomery gave a short laugh, the kind men produce when they need to perform confidence they no longer feel. A father has the right to ask hard questions about the man his daughter wants to marry. Questioning is not the same as what happened at this table tonight. He stiffened. She's my child. She's a grown woman. The eyes around that table shifted. If you have ever watched someone powerful realize in real time that they've overplayed their hand, that the person they dismissed is no longer obligated to be gracious, you know the particular quality of silence that followed. It is not the silence of resolution. It is the silence of reckoning deferred. I need some air, Simone said, and she left before anyone could stop her. I followed, not dramatically, just enough that she would not be alone in the hallway after being struck by her own mother in front of witnesses. The music from the main dining room floated up from downstairs, gentle and indifferent. She stood near a tall window, one hand pressed lightly to her cheek. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't." They would have kept going. Her voice was almost a whisper. If Marcus hadn't recognized you, they would have kept going until there was nothing left. Yes. She looked down at the floor, ashamed of something she had no reason to be ashamed of. They only respect you now, because they think you have something they want. "I know," I said. "That's the part that's going to matter most going forward." She reached out and touched the edge of my watch, the scratched face, the worn band. "You wore this on purpose tonight. I keep it because it still tells time." Her sad smile said she knew better. After a few minutes, she straightened. Her face hadn't fully recovered, but her voice had. "I'm not leaving you in there alone. You don't have to go back." "I know," she said. "That's why I'm choosing to." We returned together. The table had rearranged itself in all the ways that could not be achieved by moving chairs. People sat upright now. Smiles had been reorganized. One of Montgomery's associates stood when I entered and offered his hand with both of his, telling me he'd been looking at boutique development along the Georgia coast and would love to connect. "We were already in a conversation," I said. "You just weren't interested then." His smile weakened. Claudette tried next. She said carefully that perhaps there had been some misunderstandings tonight. I turned to her. "No, you understood exactly what you thought I was." That sentence did what volume could not. It made everyone sit with themselves. I picked up the black card and slipped it back into my jacket. "I think dinner is finished," I said. Nobody argued. That should have been the end of it. It was the beginning. People like Montgomery Vauxhall don't forgive embarrassment. They weaponize it. By Sunday morning, a narrative had already started moving through Atlanta's particular social ecosystem. The charity boards and brunch tables and private texts that do the real work of reputation in cities where everyone knows everyone and nobody says anything directly. I went back to work because work had always made more honest sense to me than family politics. Kitchens didn't dissemble. If something was burning, you smelled it. By Monday, my older brother Terrence called. He was trying to sound casual about it. Word is the Vauxhall patriarch is telling people you hid your identity from Simone to manipulate her. I looked out my office window at the hotel courtyard. "He isn't worried about Simone," I said. "He's embarrassed." Terrence went quiet for a moment. "You have to admit the whole thing looks strange, Deacon. Even from people who love you, that sentence is a particular kind of wound." By Tuesday, a business blog ran a piece about a wealthy hospitality executive who had concealed his financial identity from his fiancée's family and ambushed them with a public revelation. My name was not in it. Neither was Simone's. But anyone in certain Atlanta circles would have done the translation in 10 seconds. The writer did not call me dishonest. She raised questions. That is how character assassination works when it has good manners. It does not say guilty. It says concerns remain. Simone called from her car, traffic audible behind her. I confronted them. Both of them. Her voice was steady but tired. "Mom says they're trying to protect me. Dad says a man who hides his life is not trustworthy." "What did you tell them?" "I asked if they would still hate you if you'd stayed poor." She went quiet. The silence followed me all evening. My operations director, a woman named Helena Park, who had worked alongside me since the third property, closed my office door without asking permission one afternoon and told me I was disappearing inside myself. "I'm working," I said. "No," she told me. "You're standing in rooms and letting other people use your name like a weapon while you watch." I almost told her I was fine. That old answer was already on its way out of my mouth. I let it go instead. Maybe I had not stayed silent because I was strong. Maybe I had been trained, somewhere along the way, to survive disappointment quietly and call that strength. Then the real blow landed. Helena set a folder on my desk Friday morning. Montgomery had hired a private investigator. He'd found a kitchen fire at one of my early properties. A line cook named Raymond Osei had been burned on his forearms during a gas line failure. What the folder left out: Raymond's full medical care had been covered by Meridian immediately, without dispute. His salary had continued through recovery. After the investigation, I had personally funded upgraded safety infrastructure across every property we operated. Raymond had refused to sue. His words documented. The only executive who came to the hospital and meant it, but the version of the story being circulated to investors and journalists contained none of that, just wealthy owner, injured worker, quiet settlement. That was the sentence they were handing around at tables. Clean. Dangerous. Almost true. I stood alone in the private dining room at the Meridian Midtown late that Friday night, after the dinner service had cleared and the candles had been extinguished. The room smelled like cooling linen and lemon polish. For about 10 minutes, I sat with the possibility of walking away from Simone entirely. Not from the company. From her. I rehearsed the sentence. Maybe we're asking each other to carry too much. Then I opened the service drawer beside the cabinet. Inside was the navy napkin I had folded at that dinner and brought back with me without fully understanding why. I held it for a moment. Simone had not defended my money. She had defended my dignity, before she knew what the black card meant, before Marcus said my name, before power made me legible to people who had no capacity to see me without it. I put the napkin back. I was done trying to survive this quietly. If you have ever stood in a room full of people who have already decided who you are, if you have ever felt the particular exhaustion of being reduced to someone else's assumption, then you know that the hardest thing is not the insult itself. The hardest thing is the silence you choose afterward, the silence that keeps the peace, the silence that costs you. I had paid that cost for most of my life, in my family, in business rooms, in every space where being the quiet one meant being the safe one. What I was learning, slowly and painfully, was that the peace I was keeping was not peace at all. It was just silence with better lighting. Helena and Marcus, and our legal counsel Marcus Hale, worked through the weekend assembling everything, the full record of Raymond's care, his own statement, the payment history, the safety upgrades, and the documented trail connecting Montgomery's private investigator to a media consultant on the payroll of the Vauxhall Foundation. The metadata on the financial documents that had been circulating, the timestamp discrepancies in altered records, all of it. I told them to do nothing with it yet. The Vauxhall Foundation Gala was scheduled for the following Saturday. In the Meridian's own ballroom. Montgomery had booked it 6 months earlier, before any of this, when he didn't know whose floors he'd be walking across. I let it happen. I let him believe the ground was still his. Honest moment with you. I don't know if I could have held that kind of patience if Simone hadn't held it with me. She came to my apartment, not the flagship property, not any of the executive suites. My real apartment. Quiet rooms, books by the windows, a chipped mug I had used for 7 years and refused to replace. She stood in the doorway and took it all in. "This is where you feel safe," she said. Yes. She came in slowly. "I used to think love meant keeping the peace," she said, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. "I thought if I just kept everything smooth enough, everybody happy enough, the damage wouldn't reach the things that mattered." She looked at the chipped mug. "That's not love. That's fear with good manners." That was Simone now. The fear was still there. You don't grow up inside a family like hers and just shed it cleanly, but she was starting to name it. That mattered more than any of it. The Saturday of the gala, the Meridian ballroom looked exactly as it should. Chandeliers warm, jazz trio near the far wall, Atlanta's old money and new money arranged around tables in the careful geography of people who understand that proximity is politics. Montgomery took the stage midway through the program. He thanked sponsors. He spoke about family values. He talked about leadership with the fluency of a man who had never once confused consequence with guilt. Then he smiled. "Character," he said, "will always outlast secrets." The room gave a small, polished laugh. And then the screen behind him changed. Documents appeared. Financial records. Account numbers. My name beside figures I had never seen. For about 40 seconds, the ballroom shifted in the way ballrooms shift when something real enters a room designed for performance. Phones appeared. A board member moved away from me. Someone whispered something about federal. A journalist near the bar started typing with both thumbs. Montgomery looked at the screen with an expression of shock, so well rehearsed it was almost beautiful. "What is this?" he said loudly. Simone understood immediately. So did I. His final card. Claudette reached for her daughter's arm. "Simone, think about the family." Simone pulled away. "You always said reputation was everything," she said, loud enough for the nearest 3 tables. "You forgot to tell me that was only true for certain people." For several minutes, everything tilted. The room had made its judgment, and it was moving against me. And I need to be honest with you about what those minutes felt like. Because there is a particular kind of loneliness that comes from watching a room full of people accept a lie about you, not because they believe it, but because the lie is more convenient than the truth. Those minutes felt like every room where I had ever been dismissed before I finished a sentence. Every handshake that lasted half a second too short. Every time my silence was read as proof of whatever someone had already decided. Then I stepped toward the stage. "Marcus Webb, please keep the documents on the screen. Do not remove them." The room went quiet. Helena moved along the first two rows, placing sealed packets in front of board members and legal representatives. Our attorney stepped forward with his tablet and a folder and spoke in a voice that needed no microphone. The documents on this screen are fabricated. The metadata trail, the source transfers, and the altered file signatures are documented in your packets. The screen changed. Fake dates turned red. Edited signatures were highlighted. And then the shell payments appeared, vendor accounts traced back through the Vauxhall Foundation to a media consulting firm paid to place both articles. No one shouted. Power in rooms like this does not announce itself. It just becomes visible, suddenly, to everyone at once. Montgomery took a step forward. This is outrageous. You built a life on deception, and now I looked at him. No, Montgomery. I looked at you the way I wanted to be looked at. You decided who I was before you learned my name. Everything that came after that was just you protecting that decision. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Claudette stood near the edge of the room, one hand at her lips. We taught her fear, she said quietly. Not trust. It wasn't an apology, but it was the first honest sentence I had ever heard her say. I had enough to finish him publicly. The financial irregularities in the foundation alone would have been enough. I chose to submit everything to the appropriate authorities and let due process work without me performing it. Because some things are not about winning the room. They are about not becoming the version of yourself your enemies need you to be. Montgomery resigned from his own foundation's board 3 weeks later. Investigations moved through proper channels. Several of his closest associates quietly found reasons not to return his calls. Simone lost 1 client in the aftermath and gained 3. Claudette asked to meet her daughter for coffee in late spring, not at the mansion, at a small shop with ordinary tables and no private rooms. I didn't go in. I waited outside and walked 2 blocks, giving them space without giving them distance. When Simone came out, her eyes were tired but clear. She apologized. For the dinner? For more than that. She said she confused survival with control. She said she was ashamed of where she came from and had decided if everything looked perfect, no one could touch her. Do you believe her? I believe she meant it, Simone said. I'm not ready to hand her the keys again. That sounded like healing to me. Real healing, not forgiveness under pressure, not the performance of moving on. A boundary with both feet on the ground. 6 months later, we held a staff appreciation dinner on the rooftop of the Meridian flagship. Long tables, low music, plates being passed between people who had earned the right to sit without looking over their shoulders. Someone set navy linen napkins at every place. I noticed mine immediately, unfolded it slowly and laid it across my lap, no ceremony, and Simone reached across under the table and took my hand. Matteo, one of our youngest kitchen employees, 23 years old, came up through our mentorship program, first in his family to work in management, raised a glass of sweet tea and said, "To the boss who knows dishwashers have names." I had to look away for a second, not because I was overwhelmed, because it reminded me of why I built this in the first place. Not to be impressive, to be useful, to be the kind of room where a person's name gets learned before their value is assessed. If you have ever shrunk yourself to keep the peace at someone else's table, if you have ever swallowed your worth because you needed someone's approval more than you needed your own voice, I want to ask you something. Not what you lost by staying quiet. What it cost the people who loved you to watch you do it. Real peace is not the absence of conflict. Real peace is the moment you stop abandoning yourself to maintain it. Drop a 1 inch the comments if you think Deacon should have revealed himself at the dinner. Drop a 2 if you think his silence was the right call all along. Drop a 3 if the moment that broke you was the slap because it broke me too, and I'm the one telling the story. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. And if you've ever sat at a table where you knew you were being measured against a standard that had nothing to do with who you actually were, tell me. I want to know. The conversation in the comments is always where this gets real. If this story found you at the right moment, hit subscribe and stay close. There are more of these coming stories about people who chose dignity when everyone around them chose performance. You shouldn't have to find that alone. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Atlanta, Georgia, to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.